In the Middle Ages, the wealthiest nations were powered by one thing: gold, and only one place had an abundance of gold like no other: the powerful and diverse continent of Africa. A multitude of leaders ruled over the many nations of Africa, but one would leave his mark as one of the wealthiest of the Middle Ages: Mansa Musa, the 9th Mansa of the Mali Empire. The exact date of Mansa Musa's birth is unknown, but his reign started in 1312, at the beginning of the 14th century. He was of the Mandinka peoples, and Mansa was a word literally meaning king or possibly emperor. Arabic historians such as Ibn Battuta and Ibn Khaldun explained it as sultan. In some histories, he is known as Kanku Musa, literally son of Kanku. In the Mande tradition of the Mali Empire at the time, it was usual for the mother's name to prefix a child's, and so Kanku may have been the name of his mother. His father was Fagale, son of Abu Bakr, a founder of the Mali Empire, and nephew to Abu Bakr's brother Sunjata Keita, who was the founder and first Mansa of the Mali Empire. So Mansa Musa had a prestigious lineage. Much of what is known about him comes from Arabic historians and from Mali and Timbuktu oral tradition. At the time Mansa Musa gained the throne, the Mali Empire was largely made up of the former territories of the Ghana Empire, as well as lands that now make up the modern countries of Mauritania, Republic of the Gambia, Guinea, Senegal, and Mali. These territories allowed the Mali Empire a wide reach of vast resources, from gold mining and salt deposits to the ivory trade and slavery. When Musa came to power, it was at the height of the Mali Empire's reach and wealth, and it was a strong and stable empire. The Mali Empire was also near the Niger River, allowing trade and goods to flow along its banks, and rested to the south of the Sahara, opening it up eventually to the sub-Saharan trade routes. When Musa came to power, it was in mysterious circumstances. According to Musa's own account, his predecessor, usually thought by historians to be Muhammad ibn Ku, disappeared during an expedition exploring the Atlantic Ocean. Musa was appointed as regent in Muhammad's stead, and when he did not return, Musa was crowned as the next in line for the throne. However, while some historians accept this version of events, there are still others who doubt the claims, instead hypothesizing that perhaps Musa deposed his predecessor and created the story of the voyage. Whatever the truth, Musa was in charge by 1312, still a young man possibly in his early 20s. Mansa Musa's early reign was spent in almost continuous military conflict with non-Muslim territories surrounding his empire. This was tied into a later Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, he would make in 1324. Much of his early years as leader was spent preparing for his grand visit to Mecca, and unfortunately, this included creating an entourage that would mostly be made up of slaves. Some estimates of how many people were captured for this purpose may have been as high as 6,000 a year. Musa himself stated in Cairo that he had conquered 24 cities and the land surrounding them. Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca was to become the most renowned story about him, and the main source of information for his reign. In 1324, he set off with an entourage of 60,000 men wearing silk and brocade, including at least 12,000 slaves, who each carried huge armfuls of gold bars. This number also included several thousand heralds who carried golden staffs and organised the luggage and horses. In short, Mansa Musa wanted to make a grand and imposing impression on those who would see him. The Mali Empire, while rich in resources, was relatively unknown, as most had to cross the unforgiving Sahara Desert to reach it. This was an advertisement for his lands and his empire, a no expenses spared extravaganza designed to make people see the Mali Empire's power and wealth. The entourage included 80 camels, who each carried up to 300-pound bags of gold dust, which was given out to poor people encountered along the route. This wasn't the end to Musa's generosity. In the cities he travelled through, great quantities of gold were traded for souvenirs, including Cairo and Medina, and rumours grew from this that he built a new mosque every Friday. Al-Umari, an Arab historian born in Damascus, travelled to Cairo shortly after Musa had passed through on his pilgrimage, and noted that the procession was a lavish display of power, wealth, and unprecedented by its size and pageantry. Musa was said to have brought so much gold to Egypt that it devalued the price of it for a decade. Most knowledge of Musa comes from when he stopped in Cairo. He and his entourage camped in July of that year by the pyramids of Giza before crossing the Nile into the city. There, Musa had to meet with Al-Nasir Muhammad, the Mamluk Sultan and ruler of Egypt. There is a story that Al-Nasir expected Mansa Musa to prostrate himself before the Sultan, something expected of everyone. Musa initially refused, eventually saying he would do so only for Allah alone. Despite this difficult first meeting, the two rulers apparently then got on well together and exchanged gifts. Musa stayed for another 3 months before departing once more for Mecca in October, continuing to give gifts and gold to people along his route as the huge entourage made its way. Finally reaching Mecca, Musa was also recorded as having helped to stop a conflict. In the Masjid al-Haram, the great mosque of Mecca, an argument broke out between some Turkic pilgrims and some of the Malian pilgrims travelling with their king. Swords were drawn, and it seemed that the argument would turn bloody in the centre of a holy religious site. But before it went further, Musa came between the two sides and ordered his men to stand down. They did so, and the air was cleared between them. The party remained until the last day of the Hajj, and so much of an impression had been made of Mansa Musa that people believed his kingdom had near inexhaustible wealth, something encouraged by Musa himself, who started rumours that gold grew like a plant in the Mali Empire. But it was not to last. Feeding, sheltering and clothing an entourage of 60,000 meant that Musa, for all his apparent riches, finally ran out of money on his voyage home in 1325. It meant that Musa and his followers were forced to borrow money and sell the gifts they had bought in the very cities they had already passed through. Some rulers, such as the Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad, showed generosity in turn and gave gifts instead as the Malian entourage passed through. Musa went into personal debt to several merchants. However, it wasn't all bad on their return. Musa met the Andalusian poet Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who so impressed him that he convinced him to travel along with his entourage and visit the Mali Empire. And despite having spent his wealth, according to the Tariq al-Sudan, a West African chronicle written in Timbuktu, Mansa Musa was still dominating enough that when he passed through the cities of Gao and Timbuktu, they submitted to his rule. According to one chronicle by Ibn Khaldun, Gao was conquered by Musa's general Sagmanja. Another account states that it was actually conquered by a previous Mali ruler, but both accounts could be true, as it's possible Musa had to reassert his power. After gaining these territories, Musa started building on a grand scale. He began by filling Gao and Timbuktu with mosques and madrasas, educational institutions including universities. The most notable institution, Sankor Madrasa, or the University of Sankor, was constructed at this time becoming one of the 3 ancient centres of learning in Timbuktu. Universities were also raised in Djen and Segou, now part of modern Mali. Another vastly impressive building created in Timbuktu was the Djingerba Mosque, which still stands today. The entire structure was created mainly from earth, with some other organic materials such as straw and wood. While the historian Ibn Khaldun wrote that Abu Ishaq al-Sahili was responsible for its design and was paid around 200 kilograms of gold dust, modern analysis rejects this claim. Local architecture was at its height in the 14th century, and it's unlikely an Andalusian poet and scholar would have been responsible for its entire construction, although it is possible he gave advice on the design. Timbuktu flourished and became a centre for Islamic scholarship, as well as a thriving market for many countries. News of the new trading centre even reached merchants from Venice, Genoa and Granada, and soon trade was spanning across to the Mediterranean. Their goods would have been exchanged for much of the gold that came out of the Mali Empire. In Niani, Musa built the Hall of Audience, a building connected to the royal palace. It was a grand building, topped with a dome and patterned with arabesques, painted in bright colours. The window frames were gilded, with the upper wooden frames covered in silver and the lower ones in gold. Gilding was a technique that had existed in Egypt since at least 2300 BCE, and silver gilt was mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. The building would have looked resplendent, a monument to the Mali Empire's greatness and the power of Musa himself. While the exact date of Musa's death is not known, guesses have been made. Although possible dates such as 1332 were given by Ibn Khaldun, using the year given as the start of his successor's reign, he also stated that an envoy was sent to congratulate Abu al-Hassan Ali for his conquest of Tlemcen, which took place in May 1337, and by the time the reply had come back, Mansa Musa was dead. Modern historians tend to agree that the most likely year of his death is 1337. Whatever the true date of his death, Mansa Musa left behind an opulent legacy. His reign is commonly called the Golden Age of Mali, but was it really? While it was true that Musa's reign was filled with wealth, power and a flourishing of education, it was also the best recorded, coinciding with a rise in Mamluk and Arabic historiography. Therefore it's possible that many rulers before and even after Mansa Musa were just as wealthy and powerful, a reminder that in the Middle Ages and beyond, Africa's gold, ivory and other resources poured out into the rest of the world. Certainly his brother Suleiman, who was his successor, left a detailed account of a rich and opulent court. While we can never really know if Mansa Musa was the wealthiest African ruler of the medieval period, one thing is certain. He was one of the best recorded, and therefore his reign is one of the most important sources for medieval Africa and the connections to Europe. And Musa's rule was an impressive show of wealth and power that helped a period of unprecedented education and culture flourish in Western Africa. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.